Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are participating in this symposium. This is a session on how do we define broadband. I'm Vint Cerf. I'm president at Google, and I'm also chairman of the Marconi Society. And of course, I welcome you all to this session on broadband. I have with me, first of all, the session is how do we define broadband? And I'd like to suggest to you that that might be not exactly the right question. The best question might be, do I have the internet I need? And then we'll figure out, I think broadband should be a much more inclusive term than simply speed. But that's what this session is all about. What features of broadband would we want people to have access to, and how do we measure those features? How would we actually decide whether we had met whatever the requirements are? I see that our colleague Christophe is on and off the screen. He's trying to sort out an audio problem. We hope that it's been fixed. Christophe, would you like to unmute and see whether or not your audio is working?
Yeah, I changed the headset. Is it working better? Yeah.
Yes, much better. Thank you. You're sounding very much more audible. Whether you make any sense or not, it remains to be seen.
Exactly. That's what I was about to say. Yeah. And the content.
I've already started picking on Christophe Diot. Let me tell you that he is a colleague at Google, and he's coming in from France. So it's late in the day for him. He has been involved in the MLab program for many years now, which is all about measuring the internet and trying to understand its performance and behavior. Turns out that's a much more complicated problem than it might sound, and that's why we're having this discussion. So in a few moments' time, after I briefly introduce my other colleagues, I'll give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves further if you wish, but also offer some framing statements about this question. How do we define broadband? Let me introduce Meilin Fung, who I know well as a result of co-founding the People-Centered Internet with her. It was an honor to do so. She's now the chairman of the People-Centered Internet, among many, many other things. She's probably the world's greatest connector. I've never met anybody who has managed to connect so many people together in such a short amount of time. She's very active in the IEEE. She's active in the UN. She's active with many, many other environments that care so much about the use of the internet. And so, Meilin, thank you for joining us on this in this session. And finally, Matt Rantanen, a man I have come to know as an extraordinary engineer who leads the engineering aspects of the Tribal Digital Village in Southern California for some 19 tribes or so, but he is much more than that. He is a nationally recognized spokesperson for the Native American community, and indeed is looked upon and trusted to help usher them into the online environment. So to all three of you, thank you for agreeing to join me on this session at our symposium. I'm going to invite Christophe to begin with his framing statements about broadband and what is it and how do we know if we have it. So Christophe, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Vint. And by the way, I'm back in California, so same time zone as you guys. So my experience has been with internet measurement. Okay, since I came to the US in '98 with Sprint, I've been trying to measure the internet for large providers, or more recently with MLab for users, for home users, and for broadband. So what I can say is that measurement is a difficult task. Okay. It's not only a matter of speed, as Vint said. I don't understand why we call all the tests that we're using speed tests. It doesn't make any sense. What you want to measure is you want to measure your service. Can you access a service with a decent quality? And how can you compare providers? If I look at the measurements today, when you run a so-called speed test, you cannot really interpret exactly the numbers that you're seeing. Okay, you know that you have connectivity or you don't have connectivity, but it cannot tell you, or you cannot understand if you can use Netflix or YouTube or WhatsApp or any other service. So today, the speed test, they just give you the bandwidth to a server, which is somewhere in the internet. And you know what? Whether you do the measurement from a tablet, a phone, or a laptop makes a difference. Whether you use Wi-Fi or Ethernet connectivity or cellular makes a difference. And the location of the server makes the difference. Some speed tests have their servers inside the provider, the service provider, okay? So that's kind of a biased measurement. Some other services have their servers in the internet, in the heart of the internet. And that makes also a difference because it's a more unbiased measurement. But in the end, what people want is measurement against services and understand what they can do, what services they can access. So also the time of day you do the measurement is important, and so on. Okay, so for me, the message is, if we really want to be able to measure the internet and understand what real service people have, and what can they do with their broadband connectivity, we need and something that reflects customer experience and offer a fair comparison to compare the service that are offered by different service provider, and also we need to standardize. Sorry, the technique and define very precisely how to measure in a way that cannot be tricked by anyone. Okay, and in a way that can be compared, and that's the difficult part of it. So I will give you an example. For example, in Brazil, the national authority, I think it's Anatel, is making it mandatory to measure performance for home users against their own servers. And if you don't reach a certain level of bandwidth, they give you a fine.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, and it's very difficult because they force the service provider to embed the measurement in their home gateway. And they specify very precisely what you have to measure. And I think we need to reach that point in all countries and with all service providers so that we can do, and the other problem is you need to measure frequently, okay, which is what Anatel is doing. It's not one measurement per day. It's multiple measurement, and then you have to look at what has been measured. Okay, I think I've been much more than my 3 minutes, but the message is measuring is difficult, and it needs to be precisely defined, what metrics and how to measure the metrics. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Christophe. Before I go to our other two colleagues, your points, I think, are really important. And I'm thinking about service provider now in a much more general sense than just the internet access provider. What you care about as a consumer of internet services, what is the application that I'm trying to run doing? How well am I able to use that application? And of course, those applications will vary widely in terms of their required performance, where performance is, writ large. It's not just speed, it's latency and jitter and all these other parameters. And so having each of the suppliers of the application, as well as the suppliers of access, say something about the performance, and to standardize, as you say, the metrics for those measurements is very, very valuable. I just wanted to suggest that one definition of what is broadband is whatever speed you don't have yet. So if you don't have it, it's not broadband yet. But then there's much more to broadband than just speed, as we talked about. So I think we'd all agree that we have other parameters to worry about. And finally, it could be what is broadband is whatever is affordable. And that may turn out to be another important metric. Speaking of which, let me turn now to Matt Rantanen, because affordability is a really key problem in our Native American communities and in other parts of the world where incomes are not where they should be. So Matt, let me give you an opportunity to frame your remarks.
Sure. Thank you, Vint. So, the Native American communities in the United States, 574 federally recognized nations, and a host of state recognized nations that are, on their way to becoming federally recognized or re-recognized, are sort of late to the internet space. The lack of fiber infrastructure that exists in the United States that supports those communities, that brings backhaul to those communities so that they could build out their own endpoints. The lack of, effective incentives for incumbents to get there has sort of delayed their participation in the internet. But now in this day, as tribes are building out their own networks and trying to establish communications on today's standards, their the definition of broadband is a moving target. It is, it is the first time you get on the internet as a new user. It feels wonderful to have a certain speed and quality control, but then as you become a more seasoned user and a consumer of data, your needs evolve, and tribes are very, very active on internet platforms as they get access to it. They're very heavy users of data because they've not had this resource at their fingertips until now, and are very eager to gather up information and have access to all the the education and the training and stuff that you can DIY, you can self-consume, that it hasn't been at their reach before. So I think that broadband target, when we put a number on it, let's just go label the FCC's 25.3, sounds like a great starting point for understanding and to be able to understand the metrics of that. But once you have 2 or 3 folks in a household using a video chat system or doing what we're doing today, you realize 3 doesn't work. 25 may be at a stretch, depending on how many folks you have in the household doing school from home and work from home. And so that broadband number evolves really to the family unit or to the household unit that needs to use it. And, one of the things that we get criticized a lot when we build a network in Native American communities, oh, you're just going to basically build a Netflix community or a Netflix network. And my answer is so. And they look at me like, what do you mean so? Well, it's over an hour to drive the family to a cinema that's going to cost, for 4 people, roughly $100 with snacks to be able to attend that entertainment, when you can have that at the fingertips, in your house at the end of your broadband pipe. So why wouldn't we be eager to bring that entertainment home, where it may be tying up the only family car? It's reducing the cost of that event to pennies per day or dollars per day versus $100 per visit. So there's a lot of aspects of broadband that I think fit into the measurement, but it's an evolving nebulous thing. And what Christophe is doing is the quality control piece of that, and that is, I think, super important with the ISPs, the upstream providers, and everybody be held to a measurement so that we know that we are consistently getting what we're supposed to get. But that notion of broadband is really what you can evolve into and what your use case expands to as you become that consumer. You're on mute.
You're muted.
I'm trying very hard to be remind myself to unmute, and I'm not good at it. Thank you very much. The most common 2 words in the English language in the last 2.5 years is "you're muted." And of course, then the next 2 words are "and you should stay that way." That's the next problem. Anyway, Matt, thank you so much for bringing this up, because what you illustrated for us is that this is not a fixed target, and we made a terrible mistake if we just focus on a couple of numbers and say if everybody is past that clip, everything is fine, because the real answer is that the demands vary dramatically depending on circumstances, to say nothing of the dependence also on the provision side as well as on the consuming side. So, Maylin, you have been so international in your thinking and engagement. I know you spend a lot of time in Singapore, for example, to say nothing of Europe and elsewhere. and you've connected with so many different organizations that care a lot about internet and its performance and its use. So we're eager to hear what you have to say about how do we define broadband.
Well, I am starting off with this slide, which is Steve Jobs back in 2010, really talking about what it takes to be connected, how much we depend on each other. And I just bring this up, that even in the most connected places, we don't always pay attention to how much we depend on each other. And broadband is the way of the future for us to depend on each other. And so I actually take very seriously the topic of this symposium, the Decade of Digital Inclusion, and ask, how can we bridge these worsening divides? That it's not about just connecting. It is quite clear that connecting people, in fact, is dividing us as well as uniting us, and that the disparities of incomes and the social divides are increasing. And we have different kinds of challenges, physical, societal. We've got the climate challenge, which we have to coordinate, likely using broadband. And then the digital challenge, which is really challenging our whole notion of what does it mean to be an educated citizen in these times. And we are also in a crisis. There's the COVID recovery, there's inflation, there's the Ukraine war, there's the food security shortages. We are facing a number of critical challenges in addition to the ones I've just listed. But my go-to guy is Abraham Lincoln, who's said these beautiful words: the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. And I want us to keep that in mind if we think about the decade of digital inclusion. What do we have to leave behind? And what do we have to rethink? What we have to leave behind is the idea that government alone, or the private sector alone, or the civic sector alone can do this. We have to realize that we have to work with communities, not just individuals, but people working together, trying to make a living, like the Native American tribes in their tribal villages. And so my call here is about reimagining the value chain that we need for the future, so it's easy for people to connect through broadband, survive this climate crisis, be energy efficient, and in the end, be resilient, so that we not just allow for bridging today's divides, but we have equal prosperity opportunities for future generations. So that's my call to action, that broadband is an enabler of all of this. And if we don't consider the bigger picture of what we want to use it for, we could end up satisfying all these measurements for a few communities, but the vast majority be left behind because they're not being thought about.
Well, those are certainly challenging words, and thank you for presenting them in such an eloquent way. One thing I wanted to draw attention to is the material you showed from Steve Jobs. I knew Steve as a young man. He was a very brash character, but also full of energy and ideas. As he got older, and especially after he had his first bout with pancreatic cancer, he really changed a lot. I think the piece that you showed for the 2010 remarks were very much the Steve Jobs that I now remember. And I'm glad to say that there is a new biography, which I think reflects how he changed over time as a human. But your point is very well taken, that broadband is simply an enabler. I mean, look, I have a 10 gigabit circuit here. Well, that's wonderful. What are you doing with it? I don't know, but it's a 10 gigabit circuit. And so the question is not so much how do we measure it and decide if it's broadband or not, but what do we do with it? And does it meet other criteria that might be required in order to be the enabler that we hope it can be? So let me turn to Matt for just a second, because I'm thinking about those communities that have real economic challenge. What kinds of targets, as a provider of internet service yourself, what kinds of targets are you setting yourself for cost of service, and are they achievable?
Yeah, so that's a tough question, especially when you're providing the the last mile with wireless solution. So for example, the Tribal Digital Village Network is about 650 miles of point and multi-point links with wireless, fed with a 10 gig circuit at the head end connected to Scenic through Lewis Fox, which was a project we worked on for a long time to try to get tribes the advantage of being connected to a research and education network and get away from the full retail that we were being forced to deal with. And then on the far end of that network is a CenturyLink, or now Lumen connection. And you know, it's interesting because with the money that's coming through the federal government today, though it's not enough to solve the problem, it's enough to lay a strong foundation in Indian country. We are seeing tribes pulling away from what we call the Tribal Digital Village Network to stand alone, independent, and potentially build out their own fiber to the home, because there is funding individually for tribes to be able to do this. And so we're in a bit of a quandary. So we have a broadband speed that we're trying to hit, that's defined by the Federal Communications Commission. We have new broadband speeds that are being projected that are, you know, 4 times greater, more than what was previous. We have a densification in some of the reservation neighborhoods that doesn't allow us to do that wirelessly anymore, because the lack of available spectrum to distribute that connection with that level of throughput, the math doesn't work anymore. So we have some tribal neighborhoods that are 300 homes, and there isn't enough so unlicensed or the licensed free space to be able to use enough channels in different frequencies to be able to serve that many homes in a tight cluster. So we are trying to sort of do network redesign, some refocus, and figure out how to distribute our network with fiber closer to the home. Fiber is a complicated animal on a reservation, as there are many assets buried that they don't have record of because records were destroyed and moved around so much. So it's very complicated to dig. Obviously in California, we don't want to hang it on a pole because it burns down. But the end user I'm just going to say a non-economically advantaged tribe has a mix of people who have a career, people who work, you know, minimum wage, and people who are on subsistence. And so we are fighting a battle to keep our pricing affordable, because we know that that service is so valuable for them to get a better job, to get further educated, to get employed if they're not employed. But at the same time, you know, how do you sustain a model of its magnitude? And I have to give credit to the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, where they have not forced the network to make back all of its loss. They have allowed several of us to participate in multiple job duties throughout the corporation and not draw the most expensive salaries and requirements from the network itself, so that it may sustain under its own weight. So I think that's very forward thinking in the tribal chairman's vision of this project. And it allows us to do as much as we can for those that are limited income. We do address the Affordable Connectivity Program, ACP, that the FCC promotes. We know that number is going to run out probably in the next couple of years, that dollar amount. But we are trying to take advantage of that subsidy as much as possible to get folks connected now, so that they have the service and potentially could get in a situation where they could afford the service in the future.
This is an amazing kind of nutshell example of how complicated everything turns out to be. It's theorem number 206, which reads everything is more complicated.
Yes.
The closer you look, the more complicated it gets. And as the dynamics change in terms of available bandwidth applications that require it, or other parameters like jitter, for example, or latency, all of those have all the impact that you're describing in terms of regulatory frameworks and available assets interfere with your ability to deliver in the way that you might have intended initially. And then if you say, well, the solution is fiber to the home, then the problem is how do you get the fiber to the particular homes that you happen to care about. Well,
Sure.
Mei-Lin, let me turn to you and ask, given your experience, Singapore, for example, is an extremely well-wired country as far as I can tell. But then you paid so much attention to other parts of the world where that's less the case. Are you finding the problems that Matt is describing is similar in other parts of the world where we are confronted, I would say, with both geographical and geophysical challenges, but also economic challenges, and maybe others having to do with simply available intellectual resources and people trained to build and operate pieces of the internet?
I think, Vint, you can look at this as a complicated problem or not. There are many, many ways to get broadband access. And sometimes we get caught up in the trees and not see the wood, which is why I did my opening in a different kind of way. The analogy I want to bring is, 400 years ago, London had a terrible sewage problem, human waste. And they were thinking, okay, we need bigger buckets. We need better ways to get the waste to the Thames. We need to sweep the roads of all this waste that is everywhere we walk. And so the problem of waste was looked at as, okay, we have to solve all these different problems. It took decades before they finally so-called bit the bullet that we need a replumbing of the system so that London could have a sewage system. And that is something that I think at this time of crisis we should really look at, because I feel a little bit like we're trying to get bigger buckets and we're trying to get it faster to the Thames. And can we look at the digital plumbing system that we need for a resilient green ecosystem in which people have equal opportunity to prosper? And the United States has just issued one of the largest green industrial policies that the legislation has passed for 3 acts: the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. They constitute together $514 billion over this coming decade. And I really don't want it wasted over having bigger buckets. So $1 million here, $1 million there, and it'll be all gone. We have the chance as the government, the private sector, the communities, the civic sector to come together. So I'm pleased to say that on Monday, October 31st, I met with Deputy Secretary Don Graves at the Department of Commerce and proposed a digital cross-sector regulatory sandbox to do this in the island of Puerto Rico, in a constrained geographic space. We have the support of the Department of Commerce. We would like to launch in February. We expect to reach out to Google and to Scenic and to the tribal digital villages. And I go back to quoting Abraham Lincoln. It is not, can any of us do better, but can we all do better?
So this, oh gosh, we just lost Christophe. I hope he comes back. One thing that, oh, there he is. He's coming back again. One thing that you suggested makes me think, Mei-Lin, that we should rethink the significance and the importance of broadband communication. When we think of other infrastructure, we often invest in that infrastructure as a civic matter as opposed to a private sector matter. And when you think of the road system, for example, except for toll roads, for the most part, these are publicly funded. And so it's conceivable that there is some aspect of broadband communication that should become part of a normal civic underwriting and undertaking, as opposed to relying solely on the private sector. Am I reading your tea leaves correctly?
Yes. Let me just give an example. You mentioned Singapore earlier. Because Singapore is a very wide island, the GDP spending on health is 5% of GDP. In the US, it's 20%. And a lot of that is possible because there's a lot of prevention, but there's a lot of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have the wiring for the communication, you're really down to, you got to take the bus to the X-ray machine and get it done. But there's so much overhead when we aren't connected, especially at a time when telemedicine is fully possible. And with COVID, many of us saw how suddenly doctors' visits didn't have to be done in the doctor's office anymore. And a lot of people are never going back to that.
Actually, two things occur to me as you mentioned this. One of them, which may be quite important from Matt's point of view, is that doctors were increasingly asking for video consults, but we are also starting to see devices like mobiles with sensors on them that can be used to help deliver medical information remotely, which is of use, I mean, a specific use in diagnosis. So the idea that broadband investment has this enormous impact on so many different aspects of our lives is really important. Christophe, I'm going to call on you for a moment because as I think about trying to figure out what have I got, I've just plugged into whatever it is that the ISP has supplied to me, and I'm trying to figure out, is it doing me any good? How do I know? And if it isn't, how do I know what's wrong? I've always wanted a little button on my laptop that I could push whenever I'm not getting very good internet service that somehow diagnoses it. But how do we deal with the fact that Wi-Fi, for instance, is so variable? In my home, as I wander around from room to room, despite having multiple repeaters, I see variations of a factor of 10 in actual bandwidth experience. So how do we deal with the configuring the system so that the end-to-end results are more reliable? Oh, we're not hearing you, Christophe. We're back to the static crackle again. No, we're not hearing you at all. Gosh, this means you probably need better measurement capability to figure out why your Wi-Fi isn't working. Well, while you're trying to start that, I think you should mute right now so that we don't get static from your audio system, not from you personally. We're not accusing you of being a source of static. Matt, can I come back to your comments? You were describing an entertainment example, but what Mei Lin mentioned, of course, is a medical example.
Yeah.
What about just work? What we learned from the pandemic is that working from home is possible for some class of jobs, but not necessarily all of them. To what extent is that likely to, if we get broadband capability into tribal areas, is that likely to improve the economies in those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. The eye opener for the pandemic, obviously for everyone, and we're happy that it affected everyone, not just Native American communities, because I think it changed the game. But we lost a large percentage of our adults that had jobs that could have transitioned to a work-at-home scenario, a telecommuting scenario, were furloughed because they didn't have internet access to go home to. So it was a huge eye-opener for the travel community in general to be able to have that broadband capacity to be able to work from home. And I think what we've all seen is the reinvention of oneself after the pandemic. How many people have reevaluated their lives? I'm stuck in a rut. I don't like what I do. I want to pursue something new. The internet has been the avenue to unfold what that next possibility is for a lot of folks, whether it be online training, certifications, just discovery of new career opportunity, continued education or going back to education. It's been a dramatic conduit for everyone to be able to see their new path forward, if you will. And some of those pathways have led to, once the broadband access comes into the community, has led to a cottage industry effect where they have a skill set from their home base and can actually sell online or promote their services online and actually be functional from their home and change their industry or take their industry home and be independent from another corporation. So we have seen a lot of that. We do have a lot of artists, as you can imagine, with all of the Native American art you've seen in your lifetimes. There's an amazing amount of artists that produce art that don't have a venue. That now, with broadband, the introduction of broadband into their community, now have a venue, now have a marketplace to showcase their wares. And that has been, a dramatic change in things. One of the biggest examples of that that's still lacking is the Navajo Nation. So there's 27,000 square miles of 330,000 people. And, a large percentage of those folks are artists who have a craft that is a marketable craft that has no audience unless you're driving down the road in Navajo to see them at a roadside stall or a booth. You don't have access to those people. And during the pandemic, that was not allowed. That was shut down. So that whole population lost their conduit to their livelihood. So the intervention, if you will, or the introduction of internet into those communities opens up a world market for those artisans to be able to sell their crafts throughout now a greater audience than the people that just drove down the road in the past. And to touch back on Maylin's point of healthcare, it's been dramatic. We have a lot of healthcare issues on tribal nations, and to be able to do telecommuting has been a lifesaver, literally a lifesaver for many situations, and monitoring of patients that are in situations that have a struggle with maintaining a level of health. They can do more communication, more check-in, and that becomes more successful. And some of the future granting applications that have been applied for Tribal Chairmen's Association actually ties with their Indian Health Council to actually bring in that group of youth that are caught in limbo of not knowing what their next step is, to train them up in setting up technical devices, which they're very good at, for home healthcare monitoring, and working with the Indian Health Council and their elders to be able to tie them, communications wise, to their health council and their doctors so that they have a better experience. So that big changes have happened.
So we're going to do a quick mic check with Christophe and see whether he's back.
Is it better or?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm really sorry. Okay, so thank you for your patience. Talking about Wi-Fi, for me, it's unavoidable. Okay, we talked about performance issues. We talk about cost. We cannot request everyone to buy Wi-Fi 6 connectivity at 600 megabit per second and at $600. Okay, so what we want is we want to bring services to people based on how much they can invest and how much they can pay. Okay, and it has to be Wi-Fi. It has to be cellular. I don't understand. We're in a system where the ISPs are trying to convince us that we need more bandwidth. Okay, it's like food in the US. Okay, more you have in your plate, the better it is. Okay, so this is not true. Okay, what you need is to pay the minimum amount to have access to services. And when you fly on an airline, you're not trying to get the biggest airplane or to get a specific type of engine. Nobody would tell you that. What you buy is a service. I go from A to B with some comfort. You buy a service. In the internet, you buy a bandwidth. This is wrong, okay? And most people pay much more than what they need to access services. So I think the solution with the unavoidable fact that bandwidth is a volatile thing, or that performance is volatile because at 6 p.m. there will be more people and you have to share, okay? So the solution is, one, make sure that the internet is neutral and that everybody can share, and that ISP don't trick the system to make sure that some people have less bandwidth than others because they pay less. I think it's a key one for me. And the other one is make sure that people, they see what they can do with the connectivity they have at a given time. When in a previous job, we designed something called the network doctor, okay? The network doctor was per app. You were saying, I want to do Netflix, and it would tell you green, orange, or red for the device you're on, okay? And could eventually make suggestions to say, go to another device. I mean, if you want to do watch a video now, maybe you need to go to the cellular connectivity that you have in the home. So again, it's better measurement tools and more approachable for users. That, I mean, something I don't understand is I have 500 megs at home, and sometimes my video conference, they start blurring and they start slow, and you don't understand why, okay? With 500 meg, you need 4 megs for a video conference. So in SD. So I just don't get it. So I think we need to change that, and we need to have a measurement per service, and we need to make people understand what they can do with what they have, because nobody can have the top level, and whether you get fiber or DSL, I don't think it matters, or cellular. What matters is to have the right tool to compare your service and to know what you can do.
So it seems to me that what you just said suggests that what we really need is not just measurement. We actually need help configuring things. We really need to understand which resources are needed and what parameters have to be at what level in order to make particular applications work well. And since most of us are not systems engineers, although some of us on this call pretend to be anyway, finding ways to help people get what they need and not what they didn't need, or get what they need when they need it, seems to me very important. So I'm now much more persuaded that the topic of this conversation, which started out being how do we define broadband, is maybe what we should be trying to do is to figure out what is it that people need for a particular application, and can we supply it to them? And if not, can we give them any recommendations about how to adjust the system in order to achieve what they need, even if it doesn't necessarily require super high speeds. Let me just ask if either Maylin is unmuted. She clearly wants to jump in, so go ahead, Maylin.
You know, this measurement thing, I just want to say, who does the measuring?
No, that's a good question.
And I was asked this question at the Global AI Summit 2 weeks ago in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh. And they said, is it an NGO? Is it philanthropy? Is it the government? Is it an academic? And they said, the answer is so clear. It's the people. Do you have what you need to get your healthcare, to get your education, to do the job? We have the conversational AI to actually get these answers from the people themselves. We don't have to have somebody else's interpretation of it. Of course, they need to actually have access to a phone in order to even give an answer. So it is a bias survey in that if you don't have a phone, your voice is not heard. But a lot of people have phones. So we should measure by asking people, can you get the job done? Can you get your healthcare? Can you get your education? And
so, just since we're supposedly focused for the moment on the technical side of things, I still imagine that what we would like to understand is what we should be delivering. How do we measure what we are delivering? How do we measure what we need to deliver? Do we also need to measure over time? This is one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of the measurement tools, including the ones that we've used in the MLab system, are sort of spot measurements where you run a speed test. And most of the time when you run the speed test is when you're not happy with the performance of the system. So there's probably some bias with the data that you get. But I really liked what Christophe said earlier about figuring out which things should be part of the measurement. You know, what are the endpoints that should be part of the measurement? And it's clear that the user is on one end, but understanding what's between the user and the service on the other end is really important. And I wonder if there's any way for us to better measure what is going on between my laptop and the service host at the other end, given that there are many intervening parties and potentially networks in between. So how do we get people to cooperate? This is always Mei Lin's point, in order to make this work well for everyone.
If I may, I think you make people cooperate by giving them something in exchange, which is a better internet or better understanding of what they can do from home. Okay, and that's why in MLab, for example, we have been talking a lot about more diagnostic in the home. I mean, how do we help people understand what they can do and what they cannot do and why? I mean, help them tell their kids to stop playing with the game console, and because they need to do a video conferencing with the doctor, or that they have a higher priority job. I mean, have you tried to look at the configuration? I mean, you're the one mentioning. No, I think, yeah, someone mentioned configuration before. And if you go on your, most people don't even touch their hardware when it comes home.
Right,
okay,
no.
they keep the same password, the same network name, and because it's too complex. Okay, when there are a lot of things you could do, and then there is the measurement aspect you were mentioning, Vint. But you know, I think I'm not sure the question is the measurement of what's happening between you and the service. The problem is the incentive to the people between you and the service to open the connectivity or to open the internet so that you can have your service. Because currently you have the feeling that people try to maximize the money they get from you, but they don't try to maximize the service quality, and they over subscribe, they reduce the peering size, etc., etc. So I think the problem is, how do I incentivize these people to open and provide a better quality service? I mean, we can measure everything we want, okay? It's not going to fix the problem. And I mean,
so this is a classic situation where when things don't work or they don't work well, and you're looking for help, the party on the other end who's trying to help needs information in order to figure out what the problem is and maybe how to resolve it. And I keep thinking that maybe we need more effort towards helping both designing and building systems that are more self-configuring, you know, that can gather enough data to figure out what to do. I know, Matt, you've just unmuted. Maybe you have something to add to this.
Yeah, so I want to touch on a few things. The piece, as I see it, to get the right amount of feedback or the right amount of understanding of what what that looks like from the community, there is no real pathway from the community to the regulators and or the providers that in a meaningful manner where they can understand that the service maybe is subpar. And I feel like there is a quality control piece to justify that you are getting what you pay for. I also want to say that if we don't have a number or a set of numbers that we are shooting for as a goal, as a baseline, then the rest of the world works based on a number goal, right? Like a metric that they have to measure and they have to meet. It's unfortunate that that's not a functional number for everyone, but we do have to set some standard. Otherwise, people would provide much poorer service. Some may provide greater service. but we have to have some level. And I feel like what MLab does and what Christophe is working on, and I've worked with MLab before with Chris Rizzo and folks back in the day, but there's been a high value to that because it puts the threat of performance and quality control on the provider that is very good at its marketing, that's very good at telling you you have what you need, whether you personally know that you don't have what you need or not. You're being told that you have what you need. You don't need something different. MLab and the measurement baseline in the US and the other countries is the thing that kind of keeps people in check. And I think if we don't have that piece, people can do what they want. The problem with the way that it's structured, at least in the United States, is you get pushback from carriers that don't trust MLab's measurement methods, right? It's not measuring the full this. It's not measuring from A to B. It's measuring from A to A.10. It's not doing, it's not measuring that piece of equipment, or it is including a piece of equipment that causes a slowdown and makes us look bad when it shouldn't. It's not the pure measurement. I get that argument all the time from a bunch of the different carriers about MLab. So there needs to be some level of, I don't know if it's enforcement, but level of understanding that this is the playing field we're on. This is the device that will measure that playing field. And, you're going to be held accountable from the Federal Communications Commission or some sort of oversight. You can't just be selling snake oil, which we're all, we've all touched that at some point in time, but there is too much of that. If the customer itself, like the household itself, was able to put some input in that was quantified, then you might have a better result, but nobody has that mechanism in place.
So I know,
I'm going to jump in straight away.
Yes, go ahead.
The group that we are working with, PCI is working with in the Department of Commerce, is the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau, by constitution, has to take a census. Pretty much the 2030 census is determined, but they are looking for what should be measured in the 2040 census.
That's interesting.
And that's why we are doing this project with them. They have something called the Opportunity Project, and we're planning a series of sprints, bringing people together, identifying specific problems and seeing who wants to work on that and solving them in parallel. So the Department of Commerce will act as the framing mechanism for this, and PCI is right now helping to define how that might work, bringing the public sector, the private sector, public sector, federal, state, territory, city, municipality, little village, tribal village council, all of them. We're saying that the community perspective must be central for this. Only then can we come up with what do we understand is needed and who is being served and who is not being served, because it's by the Constitution that we should be providing equal access to a number of services, and broadband is now becoming one of those.
So this is, thank you for that observation. That's a striking idea, to make sure that the census includes how well are we providing people with digital access. We're going to close up on time here, but and we have some questions that I want to get to. Christophe, this is just an idea here. It's a little hazy, but I'm thinking this configuration thing really sticks in my head. I'm thinking about what information would we want to have if we were to assist someone in configuring their equipment to do the best it can do with whatever access they currently have. And then also that same information might be useful for someone who is being consulted to try to improve the configuration of the system. It's a lot like many other times when you go to the tech stop for help and they ask you for a whole bunch of information. Sometimes there are programs you can run that provide the information and let them diagnose the problem. So maybe we have a design challenge here to make things more configurable, more measurable and more configurable.
No, I mean, there is a simple answer to that, okay? We tend to measure our internet access a lot without understanding what we measure, but we never measure from the connection point to the home. What we need is your home gateway to do measurement toward the home, okay? You need to be able to understand that oh, the laptop is connected that way. There is a tablet connected in Wi-Fi in this room. It's on a repeater. You need to have a complete understanding at the home gateway. I mean, at the point where you receive the communication, to understand your network, and then you will be able to provide more configuration information and help your users. And you need to know what people are doing on the internet at the specific time, okay? And I will give you an example. In my previous job at Technicolor, we were adding access points, Wi-Fi access points on the Roomba vacuum when it was cruising through the home to do measurement about what's the best location in the home for the connectivity, okay? Because, you know, things change. The weather will change the way your Wi-Fi works. Everything will change. I mean, the fact that you have some electrical device working in the home will change. And you might have to move in the home if you want to watch something. So all this, I mean, I think today we're obsessed at measuring the internet when most of us, we have enough to do video conferencing, gaming, everything, okay? But we're not measuring the home. And this is very often where the problem is. And we need an understanding of the home network. And measuring the home network and the quality of experience is terribly difficult.
Okay, I have a timeout since we're literally a few minutes away from, we have a question. Sarah Wademan asked whether she could somehow get involved in the census discussion. Maylin, is there somewhere to go? Maybe it's to the people-centered internet in order to talk about that. So if you go to if you go to peoplecentered.org.
No, .net.
.net. I'm sorry, peoplecentered.net. Thank you. You'll be able to find more. Sarah says thank you. Darcy Gerbarg says, once upon a time, telecom was a regulated industry, and the FCC has been a revolving door for telecom executives, so regulation has become what the regulated companies prefer. The internet and the broadband providers are not the same. The large communication incumbents, telcos, and the cablecos and the wireless providers need to be required to build infrastructure to provide broadband everywhere in their footprints. And I think we'd all agree that that would be a very desirable outcome indeed. Another one of my engineer friends, Scott Johnson, asked a much more complicated question. Scott, if you're listening, I'm not going to read your question because it takes too long. But I'm going to summarize it, hopefully not doing damage to it. But he observes that a lot of the service that we get is intended for delivery of content to us on the receiving side. So it's entertainment, video, streaming, and the like. But what if we wanted to go the other way? I mean, which we're doing right now. We are pushing bits per second out the door. And the question is, does the service that we get from the internet service providers permit this bidirectional capability? And I would guess that in some cases there's real reluctance because, gosh, that would mean that you were running a business out of your home and servers and things like that. Well, excuse me, but that's what happened during the pandemic. A lot of us started running things at home. What's wrong with that? So maybe we need to see some better bidirectionality out of all this as well.
Well, I
think.
Can I put a statement, Vint? I said that Scott's question, or what he's posing there, I mean, that leaves the market open for geosynchronous satellite. If you want one directional stuff with just a click to get it to come to you, then that's a great market for that. But we all want to participate. We want to send and receive.
Yeah. So this is a very interesting point that we didn't talk about, and that's the possibility of having multiple services available to us. We already get that in a very funny way with laptops that can do both Wi-Fi and maybe also, or mobiles anyway, that can do both 5G and also Wi-Fi. And so as you start thinking about seamless access to different internet services that might be best suited for different applications, you can imagine getting, something from Starlink and something from 5G and something else from the cable co. And sort of switching back and forth among them, depending on what the needs are. Well, we are 1 minute from running out of time, so let me thank all three of you, Matt, Maylin, and Christophe, I took a bunch of notes here, so thank you. This was, oh, you can't see that because of this crazy background. Anyway, I took notes. It was a good conversation. Thank you all for your time, and all to the rest of you for listening and asking questions. And I hope you'll join us for the remainder of our symposium.
Thank you, Vint.
Meanwhile, see you on the net.